This lecture describes the history of restaurants, which has been provided in quotes because the name has changed so much over the years. To provide some structure to the lecture, I've listed the different components throughout time, starting in ancient Greece and ending in the mid-20th century with McDonald's and mass production of food. So let's begin in the ancient Greco-Roman world, where a thermopolium, or plural thermopolia, serve ready-to-eat food, causing some to compare it to modern fast food restaurants. These places were mainly used by the poor or those who simply could not afford a private kitchen. A typical thermopolium consisted of a small room with a distinctive masonry counter in the front. Embedded in the counter were earthenware jars called dolia. The establishment specialized in a few items, including spiced wine, lentils, nuts, meats, and cheese. Because of the penurious clientele, thermopolia were often subject to scorn from the upper classes. In fact, the Roman Emperor Claudius once commanded that such places were closed in an attempt to reform the populace from gathering and drinking. In case you're wondering, thermopolium literally means a place where something hot is sold. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, people had little or no leisure time, so let's skip ahead to the 1500s, where things began to change. Here we see by the end of the Middle Ages that people began to visit taverns, inns, and alehouses. This was largely due to a wealthier population with more leisure time brought on by advances in technology, the breakdown of the feudal system, and a general increase in trade and travel. While the wealthy and well-connected would stay with friends and family, tradesmen, common travelers, and other wanderers would stay in taverns, which offered lodging and simple meals scraped together by the proprietors. The quality of the meals were always suspect, and everyone ate in one room at a set time, and they ate whatever they were served. As seen in this painting from 1665, taverns were considered rowdy places for the commoners. Taverns were also frowned on because they encouraged gaming with cards, dice, and tabletop games, and of course, for drinking. Taverns also developed a reputation as a place for criminals and criminal activity. Because visitors often paid their bills in kind, tavern keepers, who were also considered part of the lower class, often served as fences for stolen goods and were always suspected of being accomplices to crime. By the late 1700s, taverns could be found in all major cities and along main transportation routes. This was supported by an increased circulation of money through bills of exchange, safer roads, and more comfortable transport. As people began to spend their extra time and earnings in taverns, these establishments formed a new locus of social life that competed with the church. Taverns and village inns were a public gathering place where you could see your neighbor and even hold events like weddings and wakes, presided over by itinerant priests. These changes also undermined long-standing social customs of hospitality. In 1765, the French scholar Louis de Jaucourt worried that now that all of Europe has gone traveling and trading, the love of profit superseded the generous welcome provided by older generations. The intricate social rules, as Jaucourt says, by which householders looked after travelers were being replaced by the new spirit of commerce. Anyways, this shattered the bonds of benevolence between private individuals, or so Jaucourt worried. The modern idea of a restaurant, as well as the term itself, appeared in Paris in the 18th century. For centuries, Paris had taverns which served food at large common tables, but they were notoriously crowded, noisy, not very clean, and served food of dubious quality. In about 1765, a new kind of eating establishment called the Bouillon was opened near the Louvre by a man named Boulanger. It had separate tables, a menu, and specialized in super healthy soups, or broth, which is bouillon in French, that were designed to revive and restore one's health. The English called these soups restoratives, but in French they were also known as restaurant, with the same spelling as restaurant. Other similar bouillons soon opened around Paris, and thanks to Boulanger and his imitators, these soups moved from the category of remedy into the category of health food, and ultimately into the category of ordinary food. The first luxury restaurant in Paris was opened in 1782 by Antoine Bouvier, shortly before the French Revolution. Monsieur Bouvier was a former chef of the Count of Provence, and his establishment reflected his refined background. It had mahogany tables, linen tablecloths, chandeliers, well-dressed and trained waiters, a long wine list, and an extensive menu of elaborately prepared and presented dishes. Items on the restaurant's menu included partridge with cabbage, veal chopped grilled on parchment paper, and duck with turnips. The restaurant became a rendezvous spot for the conservative political parties, and through implication, Bouvier was forced to close his establishment in 1795. Before he died in 1818, Bouvier left behind all of his culinary wisdom in a notable French cookbook, L'Art de Cuisiner, which was published in 1816. In this period leading up to the French Revolution, other restaurants were opened by chefs who were abandoned by the failing aristocracy. It was these restaurants that expanded upon the limited menus of decades prior and led to the full restaurants that were completely legalized with the advent of the French Revolution and abolishment of the guilds. This and the subsequent discretionary income of the French nouveau riche helped keep these new restaurants in business. Meanwhile, in the United States, taverns were also flourishing along with the increasing trade and affluence of the population. Here's a picture of the Colonial Inn, which was established in 1716. I've been there many times with my family, and it's in Concord, Massachusetts, the birthplace of the American Revolution. Here's a painting by John Lewis Krimmel from the early 19th century depicting tavern life. You can see on the left-hand side that there's a man coming through the door. He's actually the mailman who's distributing the mail. On the right-hand side, you can see an older gentleman reading a newspaper. And of course, there's plenty of libations and a mother and a child. So it's quite the center of social activity. In America, the term restaurant started to be used in the late 18th century. And the distinction here was between a business that existed solely to serve meals as opposed to a place of lodging that also served meals. Many terms were used to describe these establishments, including dining room, dining hall, and victualling house, which comes from the word victual or victuals. And in New York City, the term eating house was popular, and in Boston, the term restaurateur was used. Of course, other kinds of eateries were popular in the United States, including coffee houses, and oyster houses were the fast food of the day in the 1800s. Which brings me to the Ye Olde Union Oyster House, which was established in 1826. This restaurant is still located in Boston, and you can go there and eat oysters at the age-old, worn-down, polished stone oyster bar. Before I discuss the development of more modern restaurants, I wanted to show this painting by the Danish painter Peter Severin Krøyer from 1886. He went to a small northern Danish town called Skagen and painted everyday life, including these fishermen in the tavern. These historical statements are always dicey, but if we were to say what the first restaurant chain was in the U.S., it would be one developed by Frederick Harvey in 1873. Harvey was an English entrepreneur with a background working in food establishments and then also in the railway post office. This is where he saw that passengers had little choice but to gobble down food during short stops at train stations. The food was always of poor quality, and it took so long to prepare that customers had to return to the train with little or no time to eat. His business plan was to create a high-quality, well-organized chain of restaurants that would prepare meals to order and service them within a tight time frame. This slide shows a picture of a contemporary photo of one of his restaurants that was completed in 1911. The first Harvey House restaurant was built in Topeka, Kansas after an agreement with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, which supplied Harvey with the real estate, coal, water, foodstuffs, and staff transportation. In return, Harvey provided Santa Fe's passengers with first-class dining with impeccable service, excellent food, and reliably high standards throughout the chain. By the late 1880s, there was a Fred Harvey dining facility located every 100 miles along the AT and SF line. By its peak in 1928, the Fred Harvey empire ran nearly 100 restaurants and 25 hotels from Chicago to Los Angeles. This slide is a postcard given out by the Harvey houses. It shows the Union Station restaurant in Los Angeles. One interesting piece of restaurant history is that Harvey decided that his company would hire only single women from the Midwest. They would be trained in Canvas and then sent out to the different restaurant locations. The so-called Harvey girls would sign a contract that they wouldn't marry for 6 months and that they would live together in a carefully monitored barracks. Despite the sexist overtones, some have called this the first real female workforce in America, which provided opportunities for an estimated 100,000 single women to travel and to make their own money. Because he introduced thousands of women to the American West, Fred Harvey was also known as the civilizer of the West, and the fame of the Harvey girls led to a book in 1942 and then a movie starring Judy Garland in 1946. While Fred Harvey's empire faded with the railway, Howard Johnson's fortune raced ahead with America's growing roadways. Today, there's only one Howard Johnson's left in Lake George, New York, but at its peak in the 1960s and 70s, it was the largest restaurant chain in America, with more than 1,000 restaurants and 500 motor lodges in 42 states and Canada. The chain had a mercurial start in 1932 when it grew from 2 to 200 restaurants, spreading along the state highways until the start of World War II. When the war was over, the business had collapsed to just 12 restaurants, but it then rebounded along with the expansion of the country's interstate highways and a burgeoning middle class bent on road trips. As with the passengers who ate at the Harvey houses, motorists were a captive audience that grew in number throughout the 20th century. Howard Johnson's impacted the restaurant industry with several key innovations. He pioneered the idea of franchise businesses by allowing restaurant owners and eventually hotel owners to use the iconic name, yet create their own business under that umbrella. The result was a franchise model that still exists today in almost every large service company. During the struggles of World War II, Howard Johnson turned to feeding hungry soldiers, war workers, and school kids. The experience helped Johnson hone the process of packaging food in a central location and transporting them to other locations for final preparation and cooking. He figured out how to package foods so that they could be simply heated up on site. To improve on the recipes, the French chef Jacques Pepin was also hired to tinker with the ingredients and the methods for improving packaged food. Howard Johnson's restaurants are also known as the first place to offer a dedicated kids menu. Today, almost every family-friendly restaurant offers a kid menu as a matter of course. And finally, one big success of Howard Johnson restaurants was the weather-vane and vivid orange roof. The color caught the attention of motorists and created an architectural brand that predated McDonald's golden arches. By the 1980s, the Howard Johnson brand was losing steam, but McDonald's had already perfected a mass production model of food preparation that proved to be unstoppable. In 1955, Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, was a milkshake machine salesman when his work brought him into contact with the two brothers, Maurice and Richard McDonald's, who owned an innovative hamburger restaurant in San Bernardino, California. The small restaurant had unusually high sales, and Ray wanted to know why. As it turned out, the brothers were fascinated by the assembly line manufacturing method of Henry Ford. So in 1948, they closed their traditional restaurant for several months and retooled it to make mass-produced takeout food. Rather than made-to-order meals, the new restaurant provided a simple menu featuring the bare essentials: hamburgers, French fries, and milkshakes. This fast food could be created continuously, consistently, and quickly. To further streamline the operations, there were no waitresses. Instead, customers walked to a single window to place and receive their orders. And to save on cleaning dishes, they eliminated all plates and utensils, serving orders in simple paper bags. Ray Kroc became convinced that a chain of McDonald's had the potential to explode across the country. So Ray offered to be a franchising agent and pressed the McDonald brothers to expand their operations. After some initial business dealings, Ray lost patience and forced the brothers out of business by opening a rival McDonald's restaurant in the same area. The original restaurant changed its name to the Big M, lost a lot of customers, and eventually sold out to Ray Kroc in 1961 for $2.7 million, a very generous sum for the early 1960s. Decades after Ray Kroc opened his first McDonald's franchise in 1955, the business model still delivers large profits even as it provides inexpensive meals to the poorest members of our society, not unlike the thermopolia of ancient Rome. The popularity of eating out has continued to grow since the 1950s. First and foremost, Americans have had more money to spend. From 1947 to 1975, our real income nearly doubled. In response, full-service and quick-serve restaurants grew. In 1970, there was one restaurant for every 7,500 people. In 2016, there are 1 million restaurants, one for every 310 people. Meanwhile, budgets for eating out increased from 10% in 1970 to nearly half in 2016. Although it costs more to eat out, people are more than willing to pay for the convenience, and as long as they have the disposable income, eating out will remain a priority.